Amtrak is broken. With crumbling rail infrastructure, lack of investment in new technologies, and decreasing support from the public and politicians, the fate of the glorious American rail seems darker than ever. Amtrak began from the decline of passenger rail when the government founded a quasi-public corporation to take operation of passenger rail in the United States. While technically a private entity, it would receive taxpayer funding to keep it operational, and was originally intended to become profitable. However, that has never happened. This hybrid of a for-profit company and public entity is the current curse of Amtrak and a major problem with the entire system of rail travel in the United States. Since Amtrak operates as a private company, it attempts to turn a profit. And unlike other public infrastructure, like roads, it doesn't actually lose that much. In 2019, they were actually close to profitability for the first time since their inception, only turning a loss of around $30 million. However, much like other transportation companies, their plans for profitability did not last throughout the COVID pandemic in 2020 and 2021, which gave them significantly higher losses during those time periods than they originally would have expected, and those numbers have not gone down since. But Amtrak shouldn't be focused on turning a profit. It's public infrastructure. No one complains that roads turn a loss for the government every single year. In fact, the US government spent over $49.5 billion on highways in 2019, with state and local governments spending a further $155 billion on roads and highways. The focus on profitability and not on public investment means Amtrak is falling behind rail providers in other parts of the world, which are increasingly investing in high-speed rail. To truly compete with airlines, Amtrak needs to take this step into high-speed rail, but it isn't financially viable for them as they cannot take private investment. As a side note, private investment has seemed to be working for certain consumer rail lines like Brightline in Florida and with the huge expansion of commercial rail lines in Europe, which I will have a video about coming out soon. Instead, Amtrak needs to go through Congress and the US government for their funding, which, given the state of our current government, means they normally don't get very much funding, and definitely not what they asked for, and tend to not have enough money to operate the way they would like to, and expand in the ways they really need to. Because of their position receiving taxpayer funding, Amtrak is required to keep the lines running through less populous and profitable locations. The Northeast Corridor is the key to Amtrak's success. In 2019, the Northeast Corridor made Amtrak $1.32 billion. All other routes combined only made $1 billion. Just to say that again, over 50% of their revenue comes from just one line. And why is simple. It runs from Boston to New York to Newark to Philadelphia, running all the way down to Washington, D.C. This route is the perfect example of what rail travel should be. It even has the US's only real high-speed train, the Acela Express. However, even this line has its own major flaws. Amtrak's largest problem by far is the state of America's crumbling rail infrastructure. Amtrak largely does not own the tracks they operate on. Amtrak operates more than 21,400 miles of track. Of this, they only own 623 miles, which is about 2.9%. This makes them subject to fees from the cargo companies that own the tracks, but most importantly, it makes them subject to the cargo schedules. Amtrak will always be the second priority on these tracks, even though they are supposed to be the first priority because they're passenger rail. This priority being ignored has caused over 700,000 minutes of train delay caused by freight train interference for Amtrak in 2020, and while these companies are legally supposed to give Amtrak priority for freight, many ignore the law as Amtrak has neither the resources nor the power to enforce this law. Their lack of ownership of the rails also make it much harder to invest into high-speed rail and electrification of the rails, and that is something that Amtrak desperately needs. The next issue is high ticket prices. Trains are effectively losing their place in the transfer market, as they stop holding any real advantage. Previously, the advantages would have been comfort, price, and speed. Amtrak has lost or is losing in these advantages that they once possessed. I mean, let's take a look at the New York to Boston route, a very common distance for both businesses and consumer travel and business travel in general. I'm going to look at prices about 3 weeks away from when I'm scripting this video just to make sure that I don't get any urgency price hikes. Let's take a look at New York to Boston. On Amtrak, the cheapest ticket available for that route, which is not the Acela but normal slow-speed rail, is $100 and takes 3 hours and 37 minutes. In contrast, the flight is over half the cost, coming in at $49 and only takes an hour and 20 minutes. Planes are winning on both speed and price there. Comfort is where it gets opinionated. Personally, the Acela is a nicer experience than the plane. However, this is my personal and probably biased opinion. Lots of people enjoy the plane more, even if you do have to go through the airport, and will prioritize the speed and price over their comfort. As a note, comfort is one of the few areas where Amtrak is winning. The seats generally tend to be nicer and wider than those on airplanes, and it's definitely a more pleasant experience due to it being emptier and more quiet. Though this emptiness is a result of Amtrak's other shortcomings, but it is a nice perk. And what's worse is that this is on their flagship route, the Northeast Corridor. They should be the best at being price, speed, and comfort competitive. Gen Z is an increasing supporter of high-speed rail infrastructure and public investment into greener, faster transportation. Just as high-speed rail has grown quickly across Europe and China, America could make more investments into Amtrak and the future of rail travel. What do you think? Should America invest more into Amtrak and bring American rail travel back to its glory days? Is the future of American rail private companies like I outlined in a previous video, which should be on screen now for you to click on and watch? Or should we forget trains as a viable transit method and further invest into road and air infrastructure? Let me know in the comments, and make sure to subscribe so I can see you on next week's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye.